Hello, my name is Kent Field, and thank you for tuning into this YouTube channel, The Bible versus Opinions. God bless you in your search for the truth. While all people have opinions on many subjects, including the Bible and religion, not all opinions carry the same weight or value. For example, would you go to a plumber for his advice on brain surgery? Would you go to a mechanic for his advice on heart surgery? The point is, not all opinions carry the same weight or value on a particular subject. That's why I'm not offering you my mere opinion, but Bible answers alone. So here's the challenge. Are you open to learning beyond your current understanding and knowledge of the Bible? If so, then this channel is for you. If these studies have helped you to grow in your understanding of the Bible, or even life itself, please like and subscribe and share this channel with others so that they too may be challenged and grow in their understanding of the Scriptures.
It's always an honor and a privilege to speak to the Lord's people. I want to do a great job for you. Well, you should want to do a great job for the Lord. Well, inasmuch as you do it to the least of these little ones that believe in me, you've done it to me. So, it's for the Lord when it's for you. And I hope to give you something to go home with. I don't know what I'm going to do with this thing staring me right in the face, but that's okay. It's been a long time between opportunities to speak, but it's something that's very important to me. Where's my first slide? Thank you. Why do you believe anything? Why do you believe? And I have to try to speak fast today, so I may pick up pace as we go along. And if you don't get it, hopefully one of those cameras will keep recording and we'll post it somewhere so you can get it. Because I have 10 weeks of material to put into 30 minutes. So it's going to be not that easy. The Lord doesn't give me easy tasks. I don't know why, but anyway. Why do you believe? Why do you believe? Do you believe because, and what do you believe? What's your reason for believing? Why do you believe anything? Do you believe because mom and daddy taught you to believe that? Is that your reason? Think about it for a minute. Why do you believe? Religiously, what do you believe? And why? Do you believe because I just choose to believe? When the hour of temptation comes, you can just as easily choose not to believe. And that is what we do if we don't have a good reason for believing. Think about it. What is your reason for believing? Give me the next slide. Now, I preached this lesson. I was trying to remember in what state it was. It was about a half century ago, believe it or not. I'm a little older than I appear. And it was over 50 years ago. And as I began to preach the lesson, one of the elders got up and said, "Stop. You're going to have to stop." And he stopped me. Because he says, I don't want you to take away our faith. I was going to give them evidences for the Bible and the Scripture and the resurrection. And he said, hold on, we can't let you do that. And I was in my late 20s, early, maybe mid to late 20s. I don't want to give away my age, but the point is that I thought, what? He says, no, I don't want you to take away our faith. And I heard that before. See, I was raised as a Lutheran, and I asked, when I was getting confirmed at 13 years old, I asked my pastor, what is faith? What is faith? And he said, well, faith is really blind acceptance of something we can never really know for sure. And I asked him, well, what do we have the church for? And he says, well, the church is there for those who need her. So I don't really need the church to go to heaven? Oh, no. So as soon as I got confirmed, I was out of there. Okay, I just want you to know. What is faith according to the Bible? Because a lot of us believe that faith is a blind trust in something that we really don't have proof for. we really can't get the evidence for. And sometimes we choose that because what will evidence do for us? Evidence demands a verdict. If you were in a court of law, ladies and gentlemen, of the jury, based on the evidence or the lack thereof, you're going to have to make a decision. You're required to make a decision. Has there been sufficient evidence beyond any reasonable doubt for the freedom or the conviction of this person? Or in our case, the proof that there is a God, that he came into flesh, his name was Jesus, that he was resurrected from the dead, and the Bible's his word. That's the question. I hope I can give you something today. But now, just to talk about what faith is again. A lot of people think that faith, again, is that blind acceptance. And when you get evidence and you need that kind of proof, you really don't have faith. Well, remember there was a guy named Thomas who said, unless I put my finger right in his hand and I put my hand in his side, I'm not going to believe. And Jesus said, may your evidence perish with you. Oh no, I'm sorry, he didn't say that. He said, Thomas, give me your finger. Put it here. Put it here. Give me your hand. Go ahead, shove it in the hole that 3 feet of Roman steel made in my side. Be not unbelieving, but believe. By the way, when you read your New Testament, the word believe, trust, or faith all come from one Greek word. It's called pisteuo, or pistomai. That's it. So when you're talking about trust, when you're talking about faith, when you're talking about belief, you're talking about the same thing, according to the Holy Spirit. And that's really all I care about. I just want to know what he said. Now, what is that faith? You know, there's another thing where he says in chapter, same chapter, John 20 and verse 30, he says, many other signs did therefore Jesus perform in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in the book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and believing you may have life in his name. That's the reason for believing. He said, I've written this down. I've kept an accurate record for you. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says, now faith is the evidence of things, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That kind of goes along with Romans chapter 1 that says that God, the invisible attributes of God, can be clearly seen through what has been made and what you can see. God gives us evidence to believe. He's not asking you to have some kind of blind feeling. It is trust based on evidence. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says what? Based on that evidence, because we have such a secure hope, then do what? Be ready always to give an answer to them that ask you for a reason for the hope that is in you. You've got to be ready to give people that reason for believing. And that's the challenge, because I've found just too many members of the Lord's church can't tell you that. Some religious people say, well, look what Mary's done for me. Some will say, well, look what Buddha has done for me. People from India will say, well, look what Vishnu has done for me. Look what Muhammad, God's prophet, has done for me. All these people, what's the difference between what you have and what they claim? What you claim and what they claim. Can you produce that difference? I want you to be able to do that after today, if you haven't been able to before. Because that's what I needed. So Peter says you've got to be ready, right? Are you ready? Oh, you went, go back. Oh, you got me. Oh, you are. See, I can't see. Sorry. The eyes in the back of my head. Sorry. Open up. So the question is, why am I here? And what do I want to give you? I want to give you a reason for believing, beyond any reasonable doubt. So what I have to do today, and it's not an easy task, but it's one that I've had done to me, for me, and what I've done for a few thousand people over the last half century that I want to give to you. I want to prove the New Testament not to be theology. I want it to be proven as reliable history. And you're going to have a reason, after I give my reasons, why it's reliable history. You're going to have to give me a reason where you doubt it departed from history, where you believe it went from history into a myth and a fairy tale. You have to have evidence for your claims as well, because I'm going to give you evidence for my claims. I'm going to prove that the New Testament's reliable history, that Jesus was in fact raised from the dead, the tomb is empty, that he's therefore proven to be the Son of God. And then the Bible is his word. If he says, I'm going to send the Holy Spirit, he's going to guide you into all the truth, then he did. That's the proof. So our evidence materials, what am I going to use today? Okay, I'm going to use the New Testament documents' self-presentation of themselves. I'm going to use ancient manuscripts of other classical histories from the same period of time and compare them to our New Testament documents' history. We're going to use some ancient pagans and classical writers that were not believers. We're going to use some ancient Jewish writers and ancient Jewish texts. Then we're going to use some modern top historical scholars that happen to be atheists. And then finally, the historically confirmed New Testament documents, and we'll look at that evidence and see what it presents. So now, how does the New Testament present itself? Man, you're with me, bro. Appreciate it. And I'm in the way of this whole thing, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Unless I get to really getting excited, I'll start moving around. Okay. I'm trying to follow this outline more for you than for me. How does the New Testament present itself? Well, once upon a time, in a faraway place, there was a boy named Peter who didn't want to grow up and had a friend named Tinkerbell. That's the way a myth presents itself. Is that the way the New Testament presents itself? That's just what I want to know. Because, that Bible is a myth. Well, where do you get that idea from? That's what we have to ask the person that says that. Where'd you get that idea? Where'd you get that? Where'd that come from? There you go. Oh, I got it from there. Where did that idea come from? Well, we have to examine that. Does the New Testament present itself as a myth? I love the way the inspired writer Luke put it down. In Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word have handed them down to us, it seemed only right, fitting for me as well, having investigated everything from the beginning, carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order. In consecutive order. You want to know the order of things in the Gospels, and you know, sometimes Matthew will jump over here and there, and Mark will be. You want to know what's the consecutive order? Look at Luke. Compare it to Luke, because that's in consecutive order. Most excellent Theophilus, a Roman official, at the time an unbeliever. that Luke's trying to convince that Jesus is the Son of God. He was raised from the dead, and the Bible's his word. In Luke chapter 2, he'll do the same thing. Beginning with verse 1. And he's going to date something. He's going to date the census of Quirinius. Now it came about in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken in all the inhabited earth. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Finally, chapter 3. He's going to date the preaching of the Baptist, John the Baptist. John the Baptizer, literally. He wasn't a Baptist. He was a baptizer. Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, now that's a specific time, isn't it? But he was reigned a while. Well, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, yeah, but that narrows it down. And Herod was tetrarch of Galilee. Okay, that narrows it down a little more. And his brother Philip was tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis. And Licinius was tetrarch of Abilene, not Texas. In the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, he's really narrowing that time frame down now. The word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. Now, I'm not even going to ask right now whether you believe that the word of God really came to him in the wilderness. I'm just trying to establish, how did the New Testament present itself? Does it present itself in the sane and sober appearance of history, dating people, regions, times, events? That's all I want to know. That's all we're trying to lay out, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. 1 Corinthians 15. Verses 5 and 6. And he appeared, that's Jesus, to Cephas, then to the 12. After that he appeared to more than 500 brethren at once, at one point, at one time. Most of whom, in case you don't believe it, are alive today for you to check it out, who remain until now, but some have died. Some have fallen asleep. What that's introducing is something called the acid test. The acid test is, can you write a document about a people in time while they're still alive to deny the truth of it and the accuracy? You know, maybe like the old Inquirer and Lobster Boy and the aliens that came down and took me up and all that stuff. That's fairy tale stuff. And you can't talk to these people. But he says 500 people, check it out. He passes that acid test. Now, manuscript attestation. Well, you know, we have no originals of the New Testament. So how do you know? There's the point that the originals were to be written sometime in the 1st century. And when the earliest copies that we have in our possession, manuscripts, there's approximately a 200-year gap. Some of them are, the Gospel of John has some fragments that may even be original fragments, but let's date it back to the one or two of these fragments, and I mean one or two, I mean 1 or 200. Because even when I first drew this up, the numbers are different now. The numbers are different. How do we know anything about Julius Caesar? Anybody doubt that Julius Caesar ever existed? Any of the Caesars? I ask any atheist that. Oh, no, okay. Well, did you see him? Because they'll do that about Jesus to me, so I'll say that about them. You can't even prove that Jesus existed. I've heard people say that on TV, on the radio. Well, they haven't talked to me. They haven't talked to many people like me. How do do we know anything about the Caesars, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, the writings of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and all these people? Do you know there are no original documents of any of these histories? None. None. The histories of Thucydides, the history of Herodotus, Caesar's Gallic War, not gay war, Gallic War, Roman history of Levi, the histories of Tacitus and the annals of Tacitus. You know, how many copies do we have? And when was the original written? Well, the originals in this was supposed to be 460 to 450 BC. The earliest copies that we have in our possession from the histories of Thucydides and Herodotus are a 1300 and 1400 year gap. And yet nobody doubts the accuracy. How many manuscript copies do we have in our possession? Combined, 8 copies, 4 of each. That's it. And yet no, even atheist historian doubts their accuracy. Caesar's Gallic War, written 58 to 50 BC. Because Julius Caesar was not really a Caesar. He took his throne in about 50 BC, 55 BC. 9 copies with a 950 to 1,000 year gap. Nobody doubts it. Histories of Herodotus and Thucydides. There's only 1 copy of each that we have in our possession from those ancient times, with an 850 year to 950 year gap. No originals. And yet nobody questions this. All right, now, with fairness, let's look at the New Testament documents. What do we have? Well, there's the Codex. Let's see if I can do by memory. Codex Sinaiticus, the Ephraimic. Actually, there's another one called the Washingtonaeus, the Bezae, and the Vaticanus, Ephraimic. There's a few, actually about 7 codices that are complete compilations of the New Testament documents. Besides all the other pieces and copies that we have found through archaeological digs, every time an atheist opens his mouth, an archaeologist shoves his shovel right in it. Because he's saying, look at this. There's a 300, no originals. I agree, there's no originals, without question. But what's the gap that we have? 250, 300 years, 350 year gap. And what's amazing is that they're all in remarkable agreement. And how many fragments do we have? The number is now more than 20,000. Since I wrote this, it was 10,000. Archaeology continues to find more. You'd have to perform a miracle to get that many documents to agree in form and substance, other than what's called scribal error or penmanship problems from the scribes, because they didn't have a printing press, compared to any other classical history of the same period of time. So I just ask you, look at the New Testament documents in terms of historical verification with the same fairness that you would any other history. Now, from these histories, we will look at ancient pagans. What did they say? You can't even prove that Jesus ever existed. Well, Thales wrote in 52 AD, and he wrote about, because I have all, by the way, I have all these books in my library in New York, in my own personal library. I went and scrounged around and went to bookshops and old stores and everything else, and got all the books that I'm referring to. Thales wrote in 50 AD. He wrote about Jesus and Pilate and the crucifixion and the darkness that was at the cross that Mark discusses. So what do we have? Well, we have an ancient pagan agreeing with the New Testament documents. That's all I want to do right now. Does it put the New Testament in the sane and sober appearance of history? Yes. And confirmed by an atheist, or a pagan in this case. Cornelius Tacitus, He wrote 115 AD, approximately. And he writes about Jesus' crucifixion under Pilate and the cross. Suetonius, in 117 AD, guess what he writes about? He writes about when there was Claudius made a decree to throw the Jews out of Rome because he couldn't distinguish between the Jews and the Christians in their debate with one another over truth and religion and worship of God. So he just wanted all these Jews out of here, because what was the church for the first 200 years, basically? Primarily Jewish. History confirmed by a pagan. Marabar Serapion, 73 AD. He called Jesus the wise king of the Jews. Yes. Was it a label? Yes. But does he establish that Jesus existed? Yes. Does he establish that he was considered by many to be the wise king of the Jews? And then there's Gaius Plinius Secundus. That's Pliny the Younger. He was writing to his father, Pliny the Elder, the older one, his dad, and he writes about the Christian devotion to Christ and how they were willing to die because there was an empty tomb. And he wrote 112 AD. Then we have, that's ancient pagans, confirming the New Testament as history. That's all I want to do. I didn't prove anything else other than the New Testament presents itself as history, and pagans confirm the occurrences, the writings, the people as history in the New Testament. Okay? Now, I've been in a debate with the Hebrew University of Jewish Education. There's one of them in Aberdeen, Scotland, but there's another one in Manhattan. And I remember getting into a little debate and started a little debate with some rabbis that were outside. And so I said, is it true that the Mishnah and the Gemara, which is the two main compilations of books that make up the Talmud, is it true that, although in a derogatory way, mentions Yeshua of Nazareth over 80 times? And I don't know about that. Oh, yes, it does, but it's not always derogatory. Oh, yeah, well, back and forth, and then I got them arguing amongst themselves, kind of like Paul did with the Sadducees and Pharisees, because the Pharisees believed in the resurrection, the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, and that's why they were sad, you see. Anyway. Then there's the writing of Flavius Josephus. Flavius Josephus was a Jewish governor who became a Roman historian. He was considered a traitor by his people. But he writes about a lot of things. He wrote about the outstanding persons in the New Testament. And I have the complete works of Flavius Josephus. Tiny little print in a big book. And I've outlined, underlined, and put in yellow in my original writings, the book that I secured, of this quote that he's going to give. But he writes about Jesus and Pilate. Matthew 27 talks about that. He writes about Quirinius of Syria. Same thing that Luke mentioned in Luke chapter 2, verse 2. He writes about the Caesars and the Herods. Luke did that in Luke chapter 3, verse 1. He writes about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Matthew 22, verses 15 and 23, putting it in the context of history. The Roman official, he writes about Felix, not the cat, Felix, the Roman official that Luke mentions in Acts chapter 23, verses 23 through 26. He writes about Festus, not Uncle Festus, okay? And he writes about him we write about it in the New Testament, Acts 24, verse 27. And then he writes about, and he mentions him like this. He calls him James, the Lord's brother. That was his title. He's not saying, I think he was the Lord's brother. That was what James was known as, even amongst first century people. Just recording history. Now, He said this, and this, every time I read it, gives me chills, because every time that an atheist or a scholar has tried to debunk this or say it's a spurious addition to the documents of Flavius Josephus, they have no evidence whatsoever. And this is a quotation, translated, of course, into English, that Flavius Josephus, an ancient Jewish author, said, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of men as such as that receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, because he's Jewish, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him from the first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things about him, or concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct to this day." And then I give you the reference, Antiquities of the Jews, book 18, chapter 3. That's amazing. Why he never became a true believer is beyond me. Just he don't want to follow the rules, or whatever other reasons why personal reasons why many people today do the same thing. How about modern atheists? Now we've used the presentation of the New Testament doctrine. They don't present themselves as a myth. We used ancient pagans, right? And we showed that they put the New Testament in a historical context and agree with historical facts that are mentioned in the New Testament documents. Then we went to the ancient Jews, and we went to the Talmud itself, made up of the Mishnah, the Gemara, and ancient Jewish authors such as Flavius Josephus. There are others. Now let's go to modern atheists. Now the atheists that I'm choosing are the atheistic historical scholars from which most of our history books in university and high school are written. From their writings and their research, we get our history books. You know, those who say they don't copy some other people's material will lie about other things too. They do. And I didn't come up with all this material. I'm telling you that I was taught it. Thank God. Well, let's go to these atheists, modern atheists. The greatest work that H.G. Wells, how many have ever heard of H.G. Wells? The older people here have heard of him. There you go. He wrote a lot of fantasy books, but his best work and his biggest, fattest work that's taken up a lot of space on my shelf is called The Outline of History. He devotes more than 500 pages to Jesus and the things that he said and did. And he constantly goes to the New Testament to talk about events that occurred, like walking on the water. Now this is amazing to me, because he says concerning Jesus, we must write, and I'm quoting him, history, not theology. I agree. I agree. And he says our only source material from which we can write anything, I've left out, with authority, that Jesus said or did, is the New Testament documents. And then he uses hundreds of pages to talk about those events, but then turns around and denies the very source material and to give him the right to write 500 pages about it. For example, when Jesus walked on water, there was a storm, and actually what happened was he didn't walk on water. A fishing shack blew down and he hung 10. He surfed out on a door from the shack. Well, where did he get that from? There it is again. There it is again. He gives no reason for it. He even talks about the event, and there's no other documents that talk about the walking on the water, but the New Testament documents, and then he tries to explain it away. He denies the very source material that gives him the right to say anything on the subject. Then there's Will Durant. He wrote a book called Caesar and Christ, another big fat book. Hundreds and hundreds of pages devoted about Jesus, his disciples, the crucifixion, and tries to explain away the resurrection. And he talks about the back door to the tomb. There was an escape hatch. Or that Jesus didn't really die. He passed out in the cool of the tomb. He merely swooned, he used that word, on the cross. But then he comes to, he rolls the stone away, he unties himself from his grave clothes, he overtakes 2 Roman guards, and then, because he's got holes in his feet and his hands, he just didn't die, he just passed out. His side's hurting. You got to believe in miracles more than I do to believe in that. He talks about, and he says the same thing, same kind of quotation, our only source material that which we can write anything about Jesus, and he calls him the man of history, are the New Testament documents. Then there's Arnold Toynbee. He was a professor of international history at the University of London. Same considerations. We must give the same considerations to the New Testament documents as we would any other contemporary histories, like I was showing you before in that list of documents. And he also makes the point for validity that the New Testament, we need to consider this because the New Testament writers were contemporaries and eyewitnesses of Jesus, quote unquote. And not one fact contradicts any other reliable histories. Well, that's all I want is the reliable historical facts from the New Testament. That's all I need. Then there's David Flusser, professor of Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He said, we must consider the New Testament documents with fairness and consistency. Then Sir William Ramsay, professor of humanities, University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He was a self-described atheist and archaeologist, and he set out to prove the New Testament as a bunch of bunk with archaeology. Guess what? He became a believer. Now, let's consider the New Testament documents. They've been confirmed in the sane and sober appearance of history. Their events that we've referred to in history are referred to here. And now I just need to go through this very quickly. While Jesus was not the Son of God, he was a good man, but he was not the Son of God. He was a lying lunatic, or he was what he claimed to be. You don't have a choice. What kind of a great man says, I am the only way to heaven? You can't get to the Father except through me. Does that sound like just a wise man? Or somebody who's claiming to be somebody greater than that? What if a man came in here and says, I am the only way to get to heaven today? You'd laugh at him. Unless he provided some proof. Right? You can't get to the Father. Unless you believe that I am He, you will die in your sins. A great man, just a mere great man, doesn't make those claims. I am the way and the truth and the life. Destroy this temple, my body, and in 3 days I'll raise it up from the dead. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and my Father are one. Now, those are his claims. Let's look at his crucifixion. Jesus was crucified by experts in killing. You think the Romans knew about crucifixion? Look at your history books. Look at your history books. They knew about how to crucify somebody, how to kill them, what it took. He spent a night before the crucifixion being beaten and flogged, so much that the flesh was ripped right off his back. You could see pieces of rib. That's when that happens, of rib cage from behind. It's not just a little, like you see on TV, a few stripes here or there, a few wounds. It's not the way it worked. And then, when there was a need to kill him because the Passover was coming, or the Sabbath rather, what did he say? Go and make sure. And a Roman spear with about 5-6 feet with 3 feet of steel goes right into his side, and outflows water and blood mixed. Some say, medical people say, well, that's the heart sac with fluid on it from stress. Others have said that's one of the signs of death because the water and it settles on the diaphragm. Either way, his diaphragm and his heart sac were punctured to make sure he's dead. Take him down. So he was dead, and nobody really, other than these people grabbing out from someplace outside of history, questions the fact that he was dead. Now, some of these atheist historians also said, well, maybe he was a guy that looked like Jesus. Okay? Maybe he didn't faint, maybe he just looked like Jesus. Well, we're going to find out about that. Jesus' burial. Now, people are asking me about the Shroud of Turin, right? How was Jesus buried? According to the New Testament documents, and according to history, he was wrapped up with 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes in the grave clothes. You know what that's like? It's called a mummy. That's the way they buried them, in the folds. 100 pounds. And notice, they were coming back on Sunday to put even more on that cocoon. Because when myrrh and aloes dries, it becomes like an epoxy bond. He was wrapped up like a mummy. That's why when Lazarus was raised from the dead, he came out of the tomb, and Jesus had to say to them what? Unbind him. He was bound up. Jesus' burial, he was wrapped in that. He was in a tomb, a borrowed tomb that the historical documents say was hewn out of a rock. That means cut out. So, unless you have a historical reason for giving me another explanation from a historically confirmed document, what's the problem? I'm not even asking you to believe in anything miraculous, am I? What's the problem with a hewn out stone? What's the problem with bound a cocoon grave clothes? What's the problem with 3 feet of Roman steel? That he was crucified, that other historical pagans confirmed. And then he was placed in a tomb that had a stone rolled over it, hundreds and hundreds of pounds, into a slot, and then a seal of Caesar was put over it, which means like a wax seal. You mess with that, you're dead. You don't mess with that. And I'm going to give you a Roman guard over it as well. But what happened? Well, we know this, according to Acts chapter 2, 3,000 Jews that 50 days earlier were yelling, crucify him, became the first Christians. And why? Peter preached because the tomb is empty. David's bones are still with us to this day. But his tomb is empty. Well, the enemies took the body and hid it. The enemies wouldn't do that because they wanted him to stay in the grave and maybe 3 or 4 days later drag the thing out of the ground, kick the thing and say, there's your risen Lord. And Christianity never gets off the ground. Right? The friends wouldn't, because even when he was alive, Peter cursed and swore, saying, I don't know him. Now all of a sudden, he's dead, he's going to die for him? He wouldn't die for him when he was alive. And they couldn't because they had to go a guard, a Roman guard, at the tomb, which it amounted to at least 2 Roman soldiers. Well, Jesus didn't die, he passed out. All right, where's your evidence? And how do you get that from what he went through? An imposter. You get the idea that his disciples for 3.5 years, or his mother and his brothers and his sisters, didn't know him? Yes, I am Jesus. I look different. No. Well, how about the back door to the tomb? Fine. Show me an historical document anywhere that talks about a back door out of a stone, a grave that's hollowed out of stone. Hewn, it says, out of stone. So what do you got? Well, I say he's risen. Why? Well, not only did the pagans and the ancient Jews say that he was, and modern atheists try to explain it away, what does the New Testament document's history say? Well, now you're going to have to come up with something more than just a preconceived prejudice against the miraculous. You got to come up with some sound historical basis for anything that you come up with and say. And that's what I challenge every atheist for. And when I've debated people on college campuses, history chairs and things like that over the years, I say, now, all right, just show me. Show me. Either in this confirmed historical document or any of your other ones. Show me. Besides a mere prejudice against the miraculous. Mine says that the Roman soldiers had fainted. And literally, according to the documents in Matthew, had to be bribed. And that still was almost a death sentence to them anyway, letting that happen. The New Testament documents say that he was alive and seen by more than 500 people at one time. That you can even check it out and talk to them if you don't believe me. Look at the people in Acts chapter 2. 3,000 of them obeyed the gospel. It says, why? Acts chapter 1, that he was seen alive again and walked the earth for 40 days with many infallible proofs that it was him. So even if you say, well, you know, they didn't recognize him, but he took off right away into heaven. No, it didn't. He hung around for 40 days, the history books say. The historical record says. Which convinced those 3,000 people. My point is, he was raised. The tomb was empty. He didn't faint. He didn't pass out. It's not an imposter. He was crucified under a Pontius Pilate at the instigation of our own people, Flavius Josephus said. Appeared alive again, and Christianity got started based on a resurrected Lord. And until you can come up with a different, better explanation, you have to accept the evidence that the only option is. According to the documents, an angel rolled the tomb away, the stone away from the door. Jesus came out. He was not in a hurry. In fact, he took this face cloth that was over the face and folded it neatly over to the side. He came out and appeared to people who had known him, including his own mother. He walked the earth for 40 days with many infallible proofs. And it's confirmed by what? Ancient history. Ancient Jews, ancient pagans, modern atheists, and the New Testament documents themselves. To me, that's powerful. Because it gives me a reason for believing, and it gives you a reason for believing. I don't know if I need to be baptized to go to heaven. Jesus said, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved. He that doesn't believe shall be condemned. Well, it didn't say if he's not baptized. If he's not believing, he's not getting baptized. The order is very plain. I saw that as a 19, 20-year-old kid reading my New Testament on my own. Never heard of the Church of Christ or anybody teaching that. But I read it in Mark 16, verse 16. It just says it. 1 Peter 3:21 says baptism saves you. Not because you're taking a bath, not because you're putting away the dirt of the flesh, but because you're answering God with a good conscience. I got baptized to answer God with a good conscience. And if you haven't done it for that reason, and you haven't done it yet, how's your conscience? How's your conscience? I want to have a good conscience before God. Because I believe that the tomb was empty. And then when Jesus says, this is my word, guess what now? When Jesus says Moses wrote, then guess what? Moses wrote. When he talks about, quotes Jonah, and all that, I put my hand here, I put my hand here, say the whole thing's confirmed. Because Jesus said, I came to fulfill Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms concerning me. So he confirms the whole thing as inspired. Not bits and parts. The whole thing. I put my hand here, I put my hand here. I don't have the vast, infinite wisdom and knowledge to start picking and choosing what I think is inspired or not. I don't have that. I don't have that wisdom. Will you accept the word? Will you accept an empty tomb? Will you accept, therefore, a risen Lord? Because again, an empty tomb without a body to produce shows nothing, right? What does that prove? There could have been some kind of grave robber. I don't know how, and it's not in history books anywhere, but you know what? He was seen alive again. My Lord was risen, is risen, and alive forevermore, and seated at the right hand of the Father, where? In heaven. That's where, when I depart this earth, the Bible says, when I'm absent from this body, I will be present with the Lord. Where's the Lord? In heaven. I'm looking forward to that day. So I can eat put my head next to Abraham, like Lazarus did, reclining at table in the kingdom that Jesus promised. That's why I have good and precious promises to believe in. That's why when somebody says, well, do you have anything to pray about? Yeah, I got plenty to pray about. Let's pray. Do you really believe? Why do you believe what you believe? I hope I gave you something today to hang your hat on. If you need your prayers, please come forward as the rest of us stand and sing.
Thanks for being a part of that study segment. I promise you that, Lord willing, there's more to come. With the understanding that the mind can only absorb what the seat can endure, many of these studies have been broken up into a series of bite-sized segments. So be sure to look for the next segment in each Bible study subject, so you won't miss out on any important information. Please like and subscribe if you feel that this lesson's helped you, and God bless you in your search for truth.